Good morning to everyone who's joining us this morning. I'm guessing there might be people from different parts of the world, so good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to today's webinar on finding beacons in the dark, guide to cyber threat intelligence. Today's webinar is going to be based off of the book that we put out probably about a month ago as an ebook. And we're going to go through some of the highlights from it, discuss some of the things that we think are important, some of the fun things that we found in there, and just highlight some of the key bits from the book. It's going to be quite a relaxed style, hopefully, today. So if you do have any questions throughout, post them in, and we will try and get into them. I'm Jim Simpson, and I'm the Director of Threat Intel over at Blackberry. And with me today, we have Tom Bonner and Owen Wickens, two of the guys from the team, both super smart guys. I don't know if you guys want to do a little bit of an intro or just get into it.
Let's just dive into it today. Sounds best.
Perfect.
Sounds good. Yeah, we've got quite a bit to cover. We will be taking about an hour. The whole thing should run for an hour. If there is any time for Q&A at the end, we will do them. But like I said, submit questions as we go along. If we can answer them as we go, we will. And with that said, Tom, take it away, mate.
Thank you very much, Jim. Hello, folks. I'll say good day. It seems more generic. I think the Australians got it right. No. Cool. Let's dive straight in then. Have a little look at what is Cobalt Strike. Now, I'm sure most of you have some awareness of Cobalt Strike, or you wouldn't even be on the call in the first place, but we'll spend a little bit of time just talking about it and what it does. So, yeah, I mean, it builds itself as some advanced adversary simulation and threat emulation software. Basically, penetration testing tools, hacking tools. You know, they help you break into an environment, move laterally, deploy further tools, things like that. But I guess it's become very interesting over recent years in that we're seeing it heavily abused by malicious threat actors, right? So it's not just a tool for legit red teamers. Trial and leaked and cracked copies have made their way into the hands of all sorts of adversaries over the last few years. So yeah, I mean, that's really why we've had such a heavy focus on Cobalt Strike recently. As to how it works, I mean, Owen, do you want to give a little breakdown of the client server architecture?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, you know, Team Server and Beacon, two Cobalt Strike products, they work with a client server paradigm. So Team Server is considered your command and control server, or C2 server. It can serve the Beacon malware, though not always, but it is used in essentially the communications back from Beacon. Now, what is Beacon? Beacon is the endpoint agent. It does the dirty work on the endpoint, and as Tom was saying, kind of does stuff like reverse shells, key logging, screenshots, credential harvesting, lateral movement, etc. et al. You know, it does so much, and then that obviously communicates again with Team Server.
So it's worth mentioning, this is probably quite a simplified overview of Cobalt Strike and the framework. They provide a lot of other tools as well for, you know, mal spam and malicious documents and PowerShell injectors, payloads, but we're really focusing on just the core component, which is Beacon, the endpoint agent, and Team Server, the sort of C2 component. Yeah, I mean, as I said a moment ago, the rate of cyber intrusions has grown enormously. Behind a hell of a lot of them these days, we find Cobalt Strike everywhere. And yeah, it's definitely the common denominator in most of the, I'd say, sort of attacks we're seeing through our IR teams, a lot of the ransomwares that are being deployed, even nation states, we're seeing Cobalt Strike at times. You know, as the last point alludes to on the slide there, leaked and cracked copies do lower the barrier of entry. You know, anybody can really go and grab a copy. It's, you know, on Telegram and malware repositories and other underground sites. So it's quick, it's easy, it works. It's a good bit of software, right? It does do the job. I can see why people would want to use it. But then it also obscures things for us quite considerably. You know, when everybody's using the same tactics, it can be a little hard to distinguish threat groups. So this is why we started looking into things a bit more closely. And yeah, I mean, as part of that, we've we've had quite a lot of fun over the last year or so building a system for hunting for Cobalt Strike team servers. So we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. As a result of our sort of scanning the internet, slurping up beacons from malware repositories, from our incident response investigations, at the time of writing the book, I think we're at 55,000 beacons. I think we're at nearly 60, 70,000 now, and about 10 team servers. Yeah, is that right, Owen?
It is indeed, yeah. Well into the 60,000s now, which is quite considerable. It's not slowing down, that's for sure.
No, it's not slowing down in the slightest. So yeah, I mean, as a result of taking all of these beacons and the team server info, what we've done is we've extracted the configurations, we've pulled apart metadata, we've clustered on metadata from team server deployments, we've enriched the data we've got and correlated it with OSINT. And yeah, I think we've probably at least got one of the biggest CS data sets that we know of. And yeah, based off of that, we wrote a book, and we're going to share a lot of the insights and findings and trends and hidden features and bits like that with you along the way. So hopefully, yeah, anybody in a SOC, any of you threat hunters, IR guys, forensic investigators, you should take quite a bit away from this one. And even red teamers, unintended side effect perhaps of investigating all of this is that when we talk about it, red teamers have the possibility to improve their OPSEC at the end of the day based on their findings. But yeah, we kind of expect that. Go on, Owen, walk us through this wonderful slide.
So, it's quite difficult to condense down, so many months of work from so many people into one slide, but I gave it my best shot, and this is kind of where we came up with it. So over the course of the book, we kind of show you how to hunt for Cobalt Strike team servers and beacon. And we show you how you can plan your threat intelligence lifecycle, how you can build cyber threat intelligence into your XDR solution space, how you can protect your data, your customers, and your company, how you can gain insight from over, maybe 60 to 70,000 beacons now and about 6,000 team servers, and how you can better advise your C-level executives, your security teams, and improve your general security posturing in your company.
So yeah, that's it. I think there's a little bit for everyone in there. Certainly the hunting side and the automation we put in place to find team servers. We talk quite heavily in the book as well about our threat intelligence lifecycle. We're probably going to gloss over it a bit in this talk just because there was so much to pack in. And yeah, really all sorts of insights popping out for various stakeholders. Jim, do you want to give us a little walkthrough of CTI, what it is for us, and sort of what we've encapsulated in the book?
Yeah. So, like Tom said, we're going to gloss over it a little bit. There is more in the book, and there's more in the resources section on this webinar. There's a link to a talk did for the Blackberry Security Summit and link to the book and stuff. So, really quickly, cyber threat intelligence it's just cool names and awesome logos, right? Kind of a bit more work goes into it, and one of the outcomes from it can be cool names and awesome logos, which everyone loves a good named vulnerability. So CTI is a discipline. It's a discipline that pulls from multiple different sources, right? So you've got education, you've got your traditional intelligence agencies, you've got military use of intelligence, and it's not really the newcomer to it, but the enterprise space, like the private sector space, is now having a big influence on what CTI is. So we call it a discipline, but it is one that is in its relative infancy. There's still new paradigms, there's still new ways of thinking about things that we all have to get on board. So, like we go into the book, we have to define CTI. If you're gonna do cyber threat intelligence, you need a definition to work to. Now, we posit one in the book, and it's the one that we work to internally, but that doesn't have to be what it means for you. The reason we have a definition in place is so that everyone understands what it is that we're doing, what it is that we're working towards, what it is that we're trying to deliver as part of this process. CTI has often lacked a defined process, a defined set of things to do, and that's because it's difficult to define a set of processes. Like there's a lot of bespoke processes that you're going to want to put in depending on what your outcomes from whatever the CTI ask is, whatever that intelligence request is. So the way we deal with it inside of Blackberry is as part of a lifecycle, which takes us on to this lovely hexagon pattern. There are multiple threat intelligence lifecycles out there. They all kind of look the same. Some have 5 circles, some have 6 hexagons, lots of geometric shapes and loveliness going on. The idea isn't that we're, again, like for the definition, that we're not saying use our definition because it's the way to go. We're not saying use our life cycle because it's the way to go, but it's a good place to start thinking about it if it's something you want to start doing internally.
Formalize your
point of intelligence. Formalize your process. Right, exactly. I mean, or formalize your life cycle, and then your processes can fit inside that life cycle, and then you can start to formalize those, and those become repeatable. Every intelligence ask is to answer a question, and we go into it in the book. Questions are good, bad, ugly, and there are good intelligence questions and bad intelligence questions. And just if someone asks you a bad one, doesn't mean you can't make it into a good one and understand it. Planning and direction is where this happens, and it is obvious. It's kind of seen as the boring part of it because everyone just wants to get on and get dirty and start digging into the data, right? And start playing around with stuff. But if you get this bit of it wrong, the planning and direction bit wrong, it will haunt you forever. So yeah, again, go into it in a bit more detail in the book. Have a read of the book. There are multiple other resources out there. We're not trying to say that this book is like the one silver bullet for answering what CTI is or anything. But after planning and direction, you get collection and processing. Sometimes these two are munged together into a single step. Collection is obviously going out and getting the relevant data to answer the question. So if you don't know what the question is, if it's not properly defined, you're going to collect the wrong data, you're going to answer the wrong question. But that's what collection section of it is. Great part for automation. Hopefully, when we go on through the rest of this presentation, you'll see how we automated a lot of our collection and a lot of our processing cycles, which meant the bit that comes later when you get into analysis, dissemination, and throughout. Processing is by basically taking that collected data and getting it into a format where it is, I don't know, like normalized, but you want to present it back to your analysts in a way that they can use that data. You want them to have to do as little manipulation of the data as possible, because that's just wasted cycles for those people. You will probably be paying them very well, and you don't want them just sitting around grepping stuff out. Like, you want to get the data in the best possible representation for it. Analysis, this is where we'll get to have fun, which is where we're putting all the pieces of the puzzle together to answer that question. Again, analysis relies heavily on that planning and direction phase. Dissemination is where the analyst has formed a hypothesis, tried to prove those hypotheses wrong, come to the conclusions, and they have a product that is ready to go back to the requester. Again, dissemination, if you haven't stated what format that intelligence product needs to be delivered in, you're going to get things wrong. So planning and direction is key to understand how you're going to disseminate something back. If your SOC team want a rough and ready list of IOCs for something that's active, and you spend 2 weeks working on a 40-page PDF going into the intricacies of that malware, you're missing the mark massively. So you've got to make sure that your product is fit for those recipients, and vice versa. And then evaluation and feedback. Evaluation and feedback, we look at each of the... So first off, you're going to look at how well you did in that CTI spin around the hexagons, but you're also looking at how each of those sections performed. Did you have struggle getting the right sort of data in? Are you struggling with some of the processing elements? And you can look at that in terms of whether you need different skilled people, whether you need different tools, technology in place, or different processes in order to sort of speed things along. I'm sorry, that was a bit more long-winded than I was hoping for, and that's the boring bit over and done with, I think, from the CTI side of things, and I'll let the fun guys start talking again.
I mean, you say boring. I mean, for me, with I started in this industry 20 odd years ago. I've been a virus analyst, I've been a malware analyst, threat researcher, and a threat intelligence analyst. And I think we are really formalizing our approaches here. And as we have broadened up the industry, and we're taking people in now, as you said earlier, from like law enforcement backgrounds, military backgrounds, and it's helping mass just formalize what we're doing. Yeah. Anyway, we'll move past that.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, just sort of looking then at the initial sort of planning direction stage with respect to Cobalt Strike Beacon. Early on, we had a couple of options. So I think most security providers throughout the years have largely been reactive. They've been responding to beacons on the endpoint. There's always sort of a patient zero, a initial compromise within the network, and then you're playing catch up. So we really wanted to flip things on the head. Could we find team servers before the beacon's deployed? Could we have knowledge of team server C2 and be able to block that proactively? Can we find the beacons before it hits the target? Could we just download the beacon off the team server and extract the config? And flip things on the head, and the hunter becomes the hunted in that situation. So, I mean, with regards to our automation system and sort of approaches we can take, a few ways of doing it. Scan the entire internet using a custom-built scanner. Not very feasible, going to cost you a lot of money. Probably just not very practical for most folks. So we largely went with leveraging sort of well-known and established scanning services, think like Shodan, Census, Rapid7, things like that. So a bit of a hybrid system in place, slurping up beacons and team servers from wherever we can. Now, initially then, sort of step one, we're putting together some queries for things like Shodan. We're looking for default security certificates. There's more on this in the book, and other great resources on the internet as well, around some of the sort of telltale indicators of team servers. Default ports being exposed, some extra null bytes in the HTTP server responses, bits like that. So these allow us to scan, rather query existing scanners, things like Shodan and Census, and find potential team servers. From there, we can go knocking on the door and see if we can retrieve any beacons off the server. Interestingly, there's a bit of functionality in Team Server Cobalt Strike that includes some Metasploit interoperability. So this basically revolves around how the payloads are requested via HTTP. So they've got to be in certain. The HTTP requests have to be in a certain format with a certain URI. The URI has to be a certain length. So if you look at the example URIs on the right-hand side there, you see like AAW. That has to be that length. It then gets checksummed using a checksum 8, and depending on the values of it, as you see 92, 93 in the list there, depends on which payload you'll get for x86 or x64. So we can spoof some of these URIs, use some other ones as well, and try and pull back the Cobalt Strike Beacon sort of endpoint agent. Now, it's not quite that simple. Fairly often, we will find that the payloads are sort of wrapped up in a bit of shellcode that's going to load them. Other times, they're sort of wrapped in PowerShell scripts, things like that. So, a sort of additional step then for DLL extraction, we will go through, in some cases, emulate the shellcode. In other cases, it's pretty trivial, actually, to just sort of XOR decode the payload and pull them out. And at that point, we should be left with a beacon. Now, the beacon configs themselves, and we'll look at this more in depth in a minute, they're trivially XOR encoded with a single byte key. So there's not a lot in the way of protections over them. A couple of XOR keys in operation, 69 and 2E hex seem to be the most popular. So once we've pulled out the beacon payload DLL, we can extract the config pretty easily from there. And all of this data then, think IP addresses from the team server ports, all of the extracted configuration that we'll go through in a minute that contains things like processes to inject to and bits like that, all of it stuffed into a database. We pull in beacons as well from incident response, threat intel, and other sources, and that all gets pulled together. And yeah, I mean, at this point then we can start to produce a very large data set and mine it for information. Before we step into that, I'm going to hand over to Owen for a quick second, and we'll explain a little bit about how Cobalt Strike Beacon is configured, because that will help, I think, going forwards in the next sort of section in the presentation. Owen, do you want to give us a quick overview?
So one of the big things with Cobalt Strike beacons is how they're delivered to the host. So there's two separate kind of kill chains, you could kind of say. The first is like a Stageless beacon, and a Stageless beacon is a beacon that has everything bundled all in one. It's one executable binary or DLL that's all contained in one package and delivered to the victim machine in one go. You also have Stageless beacons, and essentially what they are is an initial lightweight stager, could be no more than 10 or 15 kilobytes, so quite small, which is then delivered to the victim machine. Once it's delivered to the victim machine and executed, these lightweight stagers can be quite easily customized and quite easily changed, especially due to their small size. But once it's executed, it connects out to the team server, and from the team server then delivers the second stage beacon, which was going to do the real grunt work back to the victim machine. And the real benefit with this is that it can essentially be so quickly customized. It can be kind of sent out in a phishing email, or it could be in a macro, in a Office document, or could be something in a PDF or anything like that. So we have a few different types of stagers. We have HTTP or HTTPS stagers that simply download the beacon payload using a Windows API called Internet Read File. There is an example of one. We have DNS stagers that use the DNS Query API. And this is what they do here is kind of very similar to DNS tunneling. Is they download the beacon payload using the DNS TXT record responses, which is quite an interesting and covert way of doing it. And there's also, I think there should be TCP bind stagers that connect to a specified address. And what these do is they use sockets to read the beacon payload, and I said bacon there, beacon payload directly over the socket rather than using any HTTP stuff on top of that. So, and finally then, we also have SMB stagers. And SMB stagers read a beacon payload locally through a Windows name pipe. So hopefully that's a good overview of stager versus stageless and the different types of stagers.
I'm just left wanting a bacon payload after that.
Yeah. I was about to say that our next talk needs to be called Cobalt Strike and Bacon Buddies. And yeah, anyway, sorry.
Perfect. Yeah, I can keep going. So Malleable C2. So Malleable C2 is essentially, it essentially defines the communication protocol between beacon and team server. So that simplified diagram that we showed you at the very beginning is exactly that. It's very simplified. It actually uses its own Malleable C2 language in order to configure the communications and blend into typical endpoint telemetry and masking it as legitimate traffic, right? So a Malleable C2 configuration is known as a Malleable Profile, and it's embedded within the beacon itself. This helps specify configuration data, which is then embedded in the beacon. It's defined in different blocks, and each different block has different facets, right? So we can see here in this image or screenshot, we have a HTTP post block. Now, what this does is it defines things like the URI, it defines like the type of request, be it get or post, it defines the headers, etc., etc. And there's many different blocks for many different things, right? So you have HTTP post, HTTP get, you have a number of different customizable. It's extremely customizable and quite well thought out. But on top of that, you also have Malleable PE, which is its kind of less talked about sibling. And Malleable P essentially defines the in-memory characteristics and the non-network related behavior of beacon. So this defines properties such as the rich header. It defines properties like the checksum, compile time, mode of how it injects into a running process, and even has like fallbacks for that. If it can't inject in it one way, it'll try a different way, and so on and so forth. So it's quite robust, and it's a really interesting way of modifying the beacon payload to be, constantly different. But luckily, when things are different, they stand out, and that's one of the best tricks we have in our arsenal for detecting these. And finally, we have a beacon config Yara, which we made and has. Yeah, sorry, I suppose I should start. What can we do with a data set of now over about 65,000 beacons? We can make the Yara rule. And using the fields stored in the configuration data, we can actually build out a Yara rule that detects almost 99.9% of the beacons we've encountered. Now, this only fails when non-standard XOR keys are used. So as you can kind of see there in header 1, header 2, that they're using the 2E or 6.9 key there. And it might fail when there's a very sparse configuration. But as you can see with that data, we've detected quite a lot. But that's not all. And I'll pass you back to Tom now because I've been talking for a while. But yeah, this is where it gets interesting.
Cool. So yeah, armed with our data set then and a knowledge of the config, what we started doing was looking at things at a sort of holistic view, and trying to map up and correlate things, see if we could draw connections between beacons, between threat actors and team servers. And yeah, so the view, the constellation on the right-hand side there is actually based off of SSL keys, which are embedded in beacons linked up to the team servers. So these are keys that are used for encrypting beacon C2 traffic. They're not sort of HTTPS certificates. And already we can see some large clusters forming. Some of those are leaked versions, some of them are cracked versions, some of them are just specific threat groups and all of their team server deployments. So we start to get a really, really good view of the night sky as we go mapping up this data. So yeah, I mean, let's start with countries then. Probably the least interesting and surprising timeline of them all. It's China. United States does appear quite heavily on the list, as does Netherlands. I think largely due to the prevalence of certain bulletproof hosters and a few dodgy ISPs giving everyone a bad name, really. But yeah, your usual suspects at the top of the list: China, Hong Kong, Russia. Yeah, not too many surprises there. Mapping this back then to ASNs, yeah, we can start to see a few interesting details around the net blocks. So, I mean, right at the very top of the list with Shenzhen Tencent Computer Systems, that's a cloud-based, think sort of Amazon, AWS or EC2 type instances. Just a Chinese version. I think the same with Alibaba. Constant Company, always very high up on the list. C-Layer was actually a stolen net block that got used to pump out beacons quite heavily. Amazon in the list. So yeah, I mean, we see Amazon EC2 instances used quite heavily for running team servers. So yeah, a real mix. Perhaps wasn't expecting to see such a mix of legitimate sort of net blocks in the list there, but that's why it's largely cloud providers being used. I mean, as for why, largely because the traffic looks legit at the end of the day. So yeah, a quick look at the standard ports that we've seen team servers serving up beacons on is perhaps quite interesting and surprising in that, port 8 is top of the list, and 443, I mean, it seems underrepresented. Owen, any thoughts on that one?
Well, yeah, well, I mean, like port 80 and port 443, HTTP, HTTPS, typically traffic travels over them. and they're not blocked in network gear, right? Because that's how most of the internet's run. You browse your web page, you're using those ports. And it was just, I suppose, maybe a strange underrepresentation of 443, considering, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sort of anecdotally speaking from the stuff we've seen from IRs and that, I think we tend to see a lot of tunneling and proxying and redirections and things like that in place with a lot of threat groups. So, yeah, it's perhaps that we're just not seeing direct traffic back to 443, and they're tunneling it using other mechanisms, would be my guess. So, certificates, again, very helpful for the sort of hunting phase when we're trying to automate the discovery of team server IPs. So there are a few default SSL certificates that are quite popular. Again, searching for those serials on things like Shodan or BT will get you quite a lot of hits. It can be configured under the Malleable C2 profiles. They're not, again, not massively heavily used, which I think adds credence to the theory that threat actors are using other tunneling mechanisms and not relying on HTTPS at the end of the day. As for the beacon protocol, so this is all stored within the beacon config itself, and one of the fields in the config is the beacon type. And that determines the C2 communications protocol. So will it use HTTP or S or SNB or TCP? I mean, largely we see HTTP beacons. There's a few sort of DNS ones out there. The hybrid HTTP and DNS beacons are, common-ish. SNBs, I think, is quite underrepresented in our data set.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just because they're generally deployed for further lateral movement, it's not, always something that's served up directly off the team server. They're then used to sort of stage malware within a domain during an attack. So definitely not as many SMB beacons in our data set proportionately as there are in the real world. Just a nice breakdown of the different types that are out there and the communication protocols they can use. Then for the configuration, so as Owen was saying earlier with the malleable profiles, this enables anybody who's using Cobalt Strike Beacon to configure a range of things from the URIs they're using to HTTP headers to the beacon stager options, as you saw. One of the interesting things we thought we'd try and do is see if we could map back a compiled beacon to the malleable profile that was used. It's a little bit tricky to do because of the different config blocks. We end up having to look at them sort of in individual sections. But at a high level, these profiles were based off the HTTP GET metadata that we found in the beacon. And we can use some algorithms, so Hamming distance, one of them, and it enables us to compare two strings and determine how similar they are, basically. How many bytes difference, or how many edits would you have to make to change one string to match the other string, is the theory behind Hamming distance. So feeding in a lot of the HTTP metadata, we can compare it to metadata from the configs and try and determine which profile was in use. Which has been quite interesting. So the default profile, which specifies nothing, or I think it's just cookie equals and that's it, is by far the most popular. And then we start to see things like the Amazon profile pop up. Obviously, that's going to mimic sort of AWS traffic and perhaps not stand out so much to incident responders, SOC analysts, etc. So I mean, we've mapped up a lot of the known profiles, and then what we're left with after that is a very interesting subset of custom profiles, often made by individual threat groups or red teamers. We've managed to track a few where we've spotted like one byte edits or differences from the base profile, and then subsequently realized there's been a spelling mistake in there or something, and that spelling mistake has enabled us to cluster other beacons. So it's been very powerful from a sort of threat intelligence perspective, being able to do this, translate it back, and figure out what profiles they're using.
I do think that it's an interesting tidbit that the more they try to hide, the more they give away to us, the more easily we're able to track them. It's
absolutely. The one thing I think I've said all along now is we've really got them in a corner. If you use default settings, we will block you on the endpoint. If you go and make modifications to your configs, we will track you. Pick which one you want, basically, as a threat actor. Do you want to be blocked? Do you want to be tracked? I feel like we're in a slightly better place these days than perhaps the industry was. Indeed. So then, talking about tracking and monitoring threat actors, how can we do that? What other tools do we have at our disposal? Now, I think one of the most common and well talked about mechanisms built into Cobalt Strike is the watermark. And this was, I'd say, a crude licensing mechanism. The watermark's stored in a file as part of team server, cobaltstrike.auth file. What we found then is that a lot of the watermarks that are in use end up being reused across threat actors. They should be unique per user, and there's a licensing system to take care of everything. But once cracked copies get out into the open, you end up seeing threat groups with the same watermarks basically baked into their beacon payloads. So it's not a brilliant mechanism, as you can see from the table in there, for identifying threat groups or even tracking them, because there are so many overlaps between groups at the end of the day. So then we discovered, quite interestingly, that the SSL Publie Keys in the config provide a much better tracking mechanism, at least somewhat more robust anyway, in that this is part of a public-private key pair that's generated on the team server, stored in a file locally, cobaltstrike.beacon_keys, and it's used for the C2 check-in and communications. And this SSL key is different from the HTTPS certificate, right? So they're distinct keys, and often, as I said, generated upon install, and we can use them to track team servers. So I guess we should caveat it by saying that there are leaked beacon keys files. So this is why, if you look at the timeline at the bottom there, you've got keys like the DFB key. That's responsible for almost 10% of all beacons we've seen. That was clearly a leaked build. However, as we start to get down through the list, you pretty swiftly end up with keys that are unique per threat actors or campaigns, and these can be great for correlating intelligence, for grouping together team server IPs. Providing that it can be leaked, it could be spoofed. Threat actors could be sharing VMs with the same keys on. It's very helpful tracking mechanism. Do you want to chat a bit about domain fronting, Owen?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Domain fronting versus masquerading is an interesting one. It's kind of one that I only recently learned the difference about. Fronting via CDNs. So fronting is via CDNs. Masquerading is not always through CDNs. So masquerading is done by modifying the host header, and it's kind of a way of like spoofing the HTTP host header value, basically, to try and throw off security solutions, I would say, if I'm getting the right term. Whereas fronting is done via
more analysts, I would say.
More analysts, yeah, perfect. Whereas fronting is done via CDNs, right? So the connection's actually redirected via a legitimate web service. So this could be, I'm trying to think of an example now. We have a few here, I suppose. CloudFront, Azure Edge, Baidu.com, a few these kind of things. They basically masquerade them. Sorry, wrong word. They front them through legitimate services, and it gives the appearance in the analyst traffic of them being legitimate.
That's basically trying to blend in. So the the fronting, I believe it's harder to do these days. But yeah, it used to be sort of the content delivery networks. It was a quirk of those where if you specified a different HTTP host name in the headers to what you're actually connecting to, the CDN would just go, oh, that's not me. I'll forward your connection on then. So to all intents and purposes, you were connecting to a legitimate content delivery network, but that was forwarding all of your traffic onto the attackers at the end of the day. I believe most CDNs have taken steps to block that, and Azure were one of the big ones recently, or sort of within the last year, who did it. But yeah, always worth being on the lookout for. All right, we'll go through a few of the other sort of basic stats from the configs as well. Again, part of HTTP headers is the user agent string. Typically, these are spoofed just using a randomly selected IE11 user agent string, but they can be manually specified through profiles, etc. Yeah, I guess, by and large, they're IE11. There are some interesting ones that stand out in there, and there are some very odd ones as well, things like Mac OS X user agent strings that, if you're running in a Windows environment, you're not going to be getting Mac OS X Safari user agent strings coming out too often. So, yeah, no, there are definitely a few that are worth looking into if you're investigating incidents, whatever. It can be a helpful giveaway, and certainly for tuning EDR solutions. Again, URI specified via Malleable C2. So this is the endpoint that the beacon will be communicating with at the end of the day, or at least what it specifies in the HTTP headers. Submit.php corresponds to the default profile, so that's pretty common. The Amazon one as well, from the Amazon profile. Most of these came from sort of popular profiles that are available online. But again, unique ones can be quite good for clustering and doing intelligence around. Pipe names, we've tried to put together as comprehensive a list as we can of SMB pipe names. I think we'll share this slide deck, TLP green, with everyone after the call. So you got those. As I said, largely used for staging payloads internally, right, for sort of lateral movement within a network. I think the sort of MSSE server, MS agent pipe names at the top of the list, definitely the most common, but we pulled out the ones from various profiles and things we've seen in IRs as well. So yeah, it can be useful. And then finally, but before we delve off into other interesting bits, there's some post-exploitation settings as well within Cobalt Strike. So this, probably most people are more familiar with this. This is the process name that's embedded within the config. I guess most people who've ever reversed a Cobalt Strike or watched it running have seen that rundll32.x is embedded in there. Now, this is not used to execute the beacon per se, and in fact, during normal execution, it may not even be executed at all. However, in response to certain commands like screenshotting, keylogging, credential harvesting, where Cobalt Strike requires additional DLL payloads, it will then spawn this process, most times run DLL32, and inject the payload into it. So yeah, it's quite interesting and useful being able to know what the common sort of target processes are for that one. Yeah, so then just dig through some of the stages stuff quickly. So this is the DLL payloads themselves, right, and how the configs have altered those. One of the things you can specify is the rich header, and this is a little signature that's embedded into the DOS stub of a PE file, so right at the very start. It actually contains information that's useful to the linker, so the count of source files that have been used when compiling it and the versions, etc. However, seeing as the rich headers are spoofed via beacon and you can specify them in the profiles, we found that I think it's the top 15 or so rich headers are found in over 90% of all beacons. So it's a really useful rule just for hunting, tagging, classifying beacon payloads. Similar thing for import hashes as well. Now, import hashes, if you see the top right diagram there, that's sort of an overview of the import descriptor. The import hash goes over all of the imported functions, like internet close handle, internet connect date, sorts them all alphabetically, lowercases them, and then hashes the names together. And this makes a unique hash per imports table. Again, much like the rich header, because there are only a few sort of base builds of beacon, the top sort of 15, 20 imp hashes are incredibly powerful at detecting, finding, and classifying beacons. And a similar thing for the export names as well. These get a little quirky and interesting, as they can be and often are specified through the profiles. Typically, the usual name is export name is beacon.dll, and the function name is reflective loader at 1, but that stands out like a sore thumb, so you can modify it in the profile. And quite often we find some of these modifications can be interesting. There was one group recently, Reactive actually, who'd been deploying a Cobalt Strike beacon, but their beacon payloads, at least the export names, module names and function names, had been sort of auto-generated. And using some quirky regex and bits, we were able to spot their payloads quite easily, just using this. It gives us a lot of scope as well, especially the compile time. Just being able to map out the release dates to the compile times. They're not often modified, so it's a great way if you're running like virus total retro hunts or something. It's a good way of slurping up payloads. And quite interestingly, so you can specify the compile timestamp via a profile setting. And very interestingly, there was a bug in Team Server that we found. So it's actually interpreting the compile time from the config as local time before converting it to UTC before it goes in the beacon P file. Net result being that the team server is leaking its time zone offset, which is great. So we can see, say, for example, we see a team server, its GeoIP says it's operating out of China, and then we go and see an 8-hour or whatever it is time zone difference from the UK, that is, or UTC even. It just helps to add weight to the theory that, hey, maybe this was in China, and it's definitely been good for pinpointing where threat actors may be operating from. All right, cool. Owen, I've talked a lot. Do you want to talk about some of the cool stuff quickly?
So I think there is another setting inside the config which isn't as much talked about, and we kind of discovered it's the proc inject stub. What this is appears to be like a secret watermark. It's actually a hash of the Cobalt Strike team server jar package. So this is calculated on team server startup, and it's then embedded into the beacon configuration. And we can actually use that then to be able to track essentially what jar was used to run it. So this is great, when distinguishing cracked or leaked or trials and private builds. But yeah, it's kind of one of those things again, right? It's if they try and modify, if let's say a threat actor gets a cracked or leaked or trial build, and they attempt to modify their jar to scrub some of the watermarks that may be left in there, or to try and modify it to be more covert, well, then we can track that too, which is another really beautiful tracking mechanism. And then I think when we oh, sorry,
I was just going to say, I loved how we discovered that one. Because I don't know, I've been on a bunch of these talks in the past, and you kind of get this idea that when we're talking about it, we're all some sort of like savant level. Oh, we look at stuff and we understand it straight away. And the proc inject stuff, we saw it, and one of the guys working on the team was like, this is working really well as a clustering thing. We don't really know what it is or why it works well. So took the string and threw it at virus total, and we got back a team server Java archive, and we're like, let's try some other ones. And you know what I mean?
With
it's
my
like
20 years worth of knowledge and experience, I looked at proc injection stub and it had a bunch of hex in it, and I went, well, that's probably an injection stub. This might be some encrypted code. All right, it's some encrypted code for an injection stub. We did not think that it was, initially anyway, an MD5 hash of the team server till, yeah, as you said, one of the guys looked at it, went cross-eyed a bit, and yeah,
virus
quite
total.
the revelation.
Anyway, sorry. Carry on, Owen.
No, brilliant Eureka moment that was. So yeah, just kind of building off on this happy accident, we have this whole team, we have this whole table here where we've mapped out the proc inject stub MD5. We have the list of SHA-256s that correlates with, and then also the versions that correlates with as well. So this is really great. It should be in the book as well, and it's a really handy thing as a piece of, you know, reference text for when you encounter one of these, right? And you can see like particular ones there in our bar chart, you know, particular ones. I can't actually read the screen there, but I think it's like A56. If my optician is going to tell me I got 20/20 vision, is very predominant there with about 23%. But yeah, there's more statistics like that within the book. And I suppose I'll leave Tom talk about this one, considering it's beginning to. But
that
yes,
meme got memed by Florian Roth. It was a brilliant day. No, so Florian had been chatting a lot with, debating, arguing quite heavily with various people, I think, about for what purpose was Cobalt Strike most predominantly used? Was it malicious, or was it, you know, red team pen testers? I think Florian was firmly in the malicious camp, and I mean, as far as I'm concerned, with all the data we've got, it very much backs that up. You know, over 90% of the hashes that we see each month, the proc inject stub hashes that happen to be the team server jar, correspond to leaked and cracked versions. And this isn't just from our internet-facing scanning. This is also from stuff we pull up from IRs and, you know, other sources as well. Yeah, I mean, Cobalt Strike is predominantly used for malicious purposes. I think we can say that quite certainly. Finally, then, we've got one more misappropriated setting to walk you through quickly. Deprecated spawn 2. In the old days, this was a hex-encoded process name prior to the introduction of the other spawn 2 settings that we showed you earlier. However, over time, since that was replaced and the setting deprecated, it's been misappropriated. And you know, just following the code through now, we can see that this is embedding another MD5 hash into the Cobalt Strike. That's it's part of the package, part of the archive. We've done a bit of looking. It's a lot harder to find these hashes on VirusTotal. Some of them were there. Occasionally they're blank. The ones we have found relate to a release notes.txt, which kind of fitted the name length checks that it was trying to do. Anyway, so yeah, it's another file that's been hashed. The value's stored sort of surreptitiously in the beacons, and we can use it for tracking and monitoring, which is awesome. So finally, you know, where does that leave us? We'll just try and rattle through the last slides. If anyone's got any questions, by the way, feel free to send them in. We'll try and get through a couple at the end. So yeah, I mean, armed with this data set, armed with all this knowledge, we started to correlate the intel via, you know, OSINT, TIP, Twitter. Never forget to search for IARCs directly on Twitter. You will be surprised. And yeah, I mean, we found masses of overlaps just based off of even simple things like IPs were giving us loads. But you know, once we'd put a pin in the map and we'd said, hey, this IP is dark side, we could then go looking at other things like the SSL Publie Keys or the team server jar hashes, and then going, okay, right, do we think this is all the same threat group? Is this leaked? Is this actually that threat actor? And then, you know, really propagating that intelligence throughout the data set so we can better spot and correlate and identify these guys early on. So yeah, that's led to masses of output. We won't go through it all right now. I think one of the big reports recently was APT41. Chinese state-sponsored group that were, they largely pump sort of financially motivated malware and a lot of espionage as well. But yeah, we got some good hits on them recently, basically based off of a modified jQuery profile. That, I mean, first they were using a base profile that was quite obscure. Then they'd made some little mods to it, and that helped us to sort of cluster and correlate, new infrastructure, new team servers, found new phishing domains, and basically to really broaden our knowledge and intel of this group. So I mean, I'll try and whistle through it because there's just a few minutes left. As we get to the end in the book, sort of following through our CTI lifecycle, we had a lot of stakeholders with vested interests along the way. So, from ourselves in threat intel, being able to perform correlation and hunting and monitoring, to IR and the SOC teams being able to, again, correlate intel, but the SOCs especially reduce alert fatigue, be able to empower analysts with contextual information around alerts at the time they're happening, to be able to go, not only was it Cobalt, but we think it was dark side, and that relates to these domains, these campaigns, and empower analysts throughout the sort of security life cycle. Forensic guys as well. I mean, so much of this has been really helpful for getting payloads out of memory, reconstructing them, pulling apart configs. Data science as well. We talk a bit in the book about how we can train up new classifiers to swat payloads and possibly configs in the future too. And red teamers, as I said right at the start, unintended consequence of this was that red teamers will be able to improve their OPSEC. So they will be able to hide better. They will be able to obfuscate configs better. But like we said, hopefully we've got them backed into a corner now, and you go default, we block you. You go custom, we track you. That's what we're aiming for. Go on, Owen, sell the book.
Finally, a free book available to download now. So absolutely, our book here is available at blackberry.com/beacon. It's a real labor of love for practitioners by practitioners. We hope you enjoy it. We hope you have as much fun reading it as we did writing it. And we have a print version coming soon, limited print run. But yeah, thanks a million. We couldn't do this without you.
Thanks a million indeed. Cool. I've not seen any questions come in throughout the talk, which means we explained everything very clearly and succinctly, which is brilliant. I can sit and waffle for 30 seconds or so, just wait and see if anything comes in. Otherwise,
while you do, before you do that, just thank you, Owen and Tom, for going through everything. It's some of the insights from this, hopefully people will find useful. People will take it to another level. But thank you very much for your time, and thank you to the people who put all this together for us as well and organising it. And
Quite all right. It's been our pleasure. Well, on that note, no Q&A questions. I think we can call it.
Yeah, just one last thing. Check out the resources on the side. Check out the call to action. The call to action is linked to the book. Resources on the side are links to some of the talks that we did at the Blackberry Security Summit. One of those does go into the APT 41 stuff that we mentioned a little earlier. So you get a full, I think it's about half an hour dive into that if that's of interest to you. But yeah, thank you everyone for attending. Tom, I'll leave you to wrap it up, mate.
That was it. No, that was perfect. Thank you very much, everyone. And hopefully catch you soon.
Thanks,
Merry
everybody.
Christmas and Happy New Year, by the way.
Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Bye.